She paid for a stranger's coffee, then saw him fire her boss the next morning. At 7:12 on a rainy Chicago morning, Mara Collins decided that adulthood was mostly just choosing which disaster deserved caffeine first. Her hair was still damp from the shower she had taken in under 4 minutes. Her blouse had a faint wrinkle near the collar. Under her eyes were the shadows of a woman who had spent half the night helping her mother to the bathroom, counting pills, and pretending not to hear the fear in Tessa Collins's voice when her left hand shook again. Mara checked her bank app while standing in line at the cafe. 1842 technically, that was enough for coffee. Technically, it was not enough for life, but she had a 9 a.m. meeting with Graham Ellis, and facing Graham without caffeine was less a choice than a workplace safety violation. The cafe was packed with people in raincoats, earbuds, and expressions of private emergency. Everyone was late. Everyone was important. Everyone believed the person in front of them was the reason civilization was failing. Then the man at the counter tried to order. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark coat that was too plain to be expensive and too well cut to be cheap. His hair was damp from the rain, and he looked at the menu board with the grave concentration of a man reading a merger agreement. The barista waited. The man cleared his throat. Is medium equivalent to operationally standard? The barista blinked. It's medium. Yes, but relative to what? The woman behind her whispers. Oh my God, Mara closed her eyes. Not today. The man continued, apparently unaware that the entire line had begun aging behind him. I'll have a coffee. Normal temperature, minimal complexity. The barista stared at him. Mara leaned slightly forward. He means drip coffee. The man turned, grateful. You do now. Thank you, you're welcome. Try not to negotiate with the muffins. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The barista rang him up. $4.12. The man handed over a card, declined. He frowned, more confused than embarrassed, and tried another card, declined again. A man behind Mara sighed so aggressively it deserved its own weather alert. The stranger checked his phone, then his wallet, then the card again, as if betrayal by plastic required a full investigation. This card usually works in Zurich, he said. That did it. The barista's patience died visibly. The line shifted. Someone muttered about rich weirdos. Someone else said people should know their balance before ordering. Mara saw the stranger's shoulders tighten, not with arrogance, with the sudden, humiliating awareness of being in everyone's way. She knew that feeling too well. She remembered her mother years ago dropping a packet of food assistance coupons at a grocery store while the man behind them groaned and the cashier pretended not to judge. Mara had been 17 then, old enough to understand shame and young enough to hate every person who watched without helping. So she stepped forward. Put his with mine. The stranger turned. You don't have to do that. I know. That's what makes it generous instead of a billing error. Mara, the barista said, recognizing her from too many exhausted mornings. You sure? No. Yep. She paid for both coffees and felt her bank balance become a smaller, sadder number. The stranger accepted the cup with both hands like it came with legal consequences. I'll pay you back, he said. Unless you're secretly a prince, I think I'll survive the $4. I'm definitely not a prince. That's exactly what a prince with bad credit would say. He laughed, startled, as if laughter had not been on his schedule. They stepped aside to the pickup counter. Mara grabbed napkins, checked the time and felt her stomach drop. She was now officially late enough for Graham to enjoy it. The stranger looked at her badge clipped crookedly to her bag. Brightline Media? Unfortunately. You work there. I am employed there. Work implies a level of mutual respect I'm not ready to confirm. His expression sharpened slightly, though Mara was too tired to notice. What do you do? Officially, coordination assistant. Unofficially, human apology machine. I organize campaigns, fix other people's mistakes, and get blamed when the printer develops emotional boundaries. He smiled again. Sounds demanding. It's fine. I'm only one passive-aggressive email away from spiritual enlightenment. And your boss? Mara laughed once into her coffee. My boss thinks leadership means stealing your umbrella and then telling you rain builds character. The man studied her over the rim of his cup. I'm observing a place that may need fixing, he said. Mara paused. Then she nodded slowly. That is either very mysterious or the opening line of a man about to sell me a productivity app. Neither. Worse. Consultant? His face almost gave him away. Something like that. Mara checked the time again. Well, good luck fixing whatever broken thing adopted you. I have to go be professionally belittled. She hurried out into the rain. Evan Pierce watched her leave. He did not follow immediately. He looked down at the coffee she had paid for, then toward the glass towers across the street where Brightline Media occupied floors 14 through 18. Pierce Holdings had acquired the company 6 weeks earlier. Since then, anonymous complaints had piled up faster than quarterly reports. Bullying, retaliation, stolen work. HR silence. Evan had decided to observe quietly before making changes. He had not expected his first useful report to cost a stranger $4. Mara reached Brightline 9 minutes late. Graham Ellis was waiting near the conference room, like a man who had been personally betrayed by traffic, weather, and the concept of caregiving. "Mara," he said loud enough for the team to hear, "glad you could join us." She kept walking. "Good morning. That depends on whether you finished the deck. I sent it at 1:43 a.m. Yes, after I requested it at 6 p.m. Right. I should bent time." A few people looked down to hide smiles. Graham did not. His voice turned smooth and dangerous. "Some of us don't have the luxury of treating deadlines as emotional suggestions." Mara felt heat rise in her face. "My mother had a medical issue last night. And I'm sympathetic," Graham said, with no sympathy anywhere near him. "But people with complicated personal circumstances need to be especially careful about reliability." The room went still. Owen, the graphic designer beside the screen, looked at Mara, then away. He had helped her finish the visuals last night. He knew Graham had changed direction 3 times and then claimed the idea as his own. Mara swallowed. She needed this job. More specifically, she needed the insurance attached to this job. Her mother's rehab did not care about dignity, so she sat. The meeting began. Graham presented the campaign strategy Mara had built, using her phrases, her structure, even the line she had written at 1:18 a.m. while reheating soup for her mother. The team praised him. Mara took notes. By the time the meeting ended, her jaw hurt from not speaking. Graham called her back after everyone else left. He told her the revised deck needed to be redone before lunch. He told her her tone had been defensive. He told her Brightline valued team players, and team players did not make leadership manage around their personal lives. Mara nodded because nodding was cheaper than unemployment. When she stepped out of the room, she saw the coffee stranger standing near reception with a visitor badge. He looked different in the fluorescent office light. Still damp from rain, still holding the coffee cup, still too composed for someone whose Zurich card had failed before 8 a.m. Mara forced a smile. "Please tell me you're not here to fix the printer. It bites." He looked past her toward the conference room, where Graham was laughing loudly on a video call with senior leadership. Then he looked back at her. "Does he always speak to you like that?" Mara shifted the stack of folders against her chest. She should have lied. She usually did. Instead, maybe because she was tired, maybe because he already owed her $4, she said the truth lightly enough to survive it. Only on days ending in Y, the stranger did not smile this time. He looked at Brightline's glass doors, at the rows of desks beyond them, and at Mara standing there with too much work and not enough protection. Then he said quietly, "Tomorrow may be different." Mara almost laughed. People who did not have to survive a place always thought tomorrow had better manners. "Sure," she said. "And maybe the printer will apologize." She walked back to her desk. Behind her, Evan Pierce touched the visitor badge clipped to his coat and looked again at Graham Ellis through the glass. Tomorrow, he thought, would indeed be different. By 9 the next morning, Brightline Media smelled like burnt coffee, printer toner, and fear disguised as productivity. Mara arrived early, not because she felt ambitious. Because Graham had sent 6 emails before sunrise, each one slightly more dramatic than the last. The revised campaign deck had to be ready for the all-company meeting with the new parent company. Fonts needed alignment, charts needed replacing. Graham's name needed to appear on the title slide, despite the fact that Mara had built the entire presentation while eating cereal over her kitchen sink at 2 a.m. She sat at her desk with a coffee she could barely afford, and a headache she had definitely earned. Owen rolled his chair closer and whispered that the new CEO was coming in person. Mara kept typing. Executives came and went. They all used words like culture, transparency, family, and transformation until the words meant nothing. The only transformation Mara cared about was turning her mother's insurance claim from pending to approved. At 9:47, Graham appeared beside her desk. His suit was immaculate, his smile was not. He reminded her that she was to sit near the wall and take notes. She was not to over-explain. She was not to correct leadership in front of the new owners. She was not to let her personal stress affect the room. Mara looked at the slides open on her laptop, her ideas, her structure. His team. She nodded. Because nodding was still cheaper than losing health insurance. The conference room filled quickly. Managers took the front seats, staff lined the walls. A few people tried to look excited. Most looked like they were trying to guess whether the acquisition meant layoffs. Graham stood near the screen, glowing with borrowed authority. Mara sat at the side table with her notebook and pen. Then the door opened. The man from the coffee shop walked in. For 1 second, Mara's brain refused the information. He was no longer wearing the plain, rain-damp coat. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made by someone who charged more than Mara's monthly rent. His hair was dry and neatly combed. His expression had shifted from mildly confused coffee victim to something calm, direct, and impossible to ignore. The room stood. Someone introduced him as Evan Pierce, CEO of Pierce Holdings. Mara dropped her pen. It hit the floor, rolled beneath the table, and, because the universe had a flair for physical comedy, stopped directly beside Evan's shoe. He looked down, then at her, not long, not obviously, but just enough. Mara bent to retrieve the pen and whispered to herself, "Fantastic. I bought capitalism breakfast." Evan began without the usual acquisition speech, no talk of synergy. No inspirational slide. No raw promise that everyone was valued while half the room quietly refreshed job boards. He said he had spent several weeks observing Brightline, CEO, not as a visitor, an applicant, a temporary consultant, a customer. A man whose card had been declined at the coffee shop downstairs. A nervous laugh moved through the room, then died. Graham's face lost color so gradually it was almost elegant. Evan turned to the screen. The first slide showed a timeline of complaints filed over the past 18 months. Bullying, retaliation, credit theft, manipulated performance reviews. Employees with caregiving responsibilities being labeled unreliable. Anonymous reports closed without investigation. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. The next slide showed email chains. Graham's emails. Some were familiar. Too familiar. Requests sent late at night, followed by complaints about delayed turnaround. Edits Mara had made, forwarded upward without her name. Feedback notes describing her as emotionally reactive after she had asked for clarity. A performance flag entered the week her mother had been hospitalized. The room became painfully still. Owen stared at the table. Graham recovered enough to speak. He called the evidence incomplete. He said high standards were being misread as hostility. He said Brightline had been under intense pressure, and some employees struggled with accountability. Then he made the mistake of looking at Mara. He suggested she was talented but unstable, that her lateness, family obligations, and sensitivity had created friction. He implied, carefully enough for a lawyer but clearly enough for everyone else, that Evan had been influenced by a personal interaction outside the office. Mara felt every eye turned toward her, the coffee shop, the $4, her tired joke. Her life suddenly useful as evidence in someone else's trial. Her stomach twisted. Evan saw it and stopped. He did not defend her as if she needed rescuing. He did not tell the room she was good or kind or deserving. He did not turn her into a symbol. He looked at Graham instead. "This is not about Mara Collins buying me coffee," he said. "It is about a company where everyone knew what was happening and learned to survive it quietly." No one moved. Evan continued. Graham Ellis's employment was terminated, effective immediately. The sentence landed with less drama than people might expect. No shouting, no gavel. Just a man in a perfect suit losing the power he had used to make other people small. Graham tried one more time. He said Evan was making a mistake. See if this would destabilize operations. He said staff needed discipline, not emotional theater. Evan listened. Then he said Brightline would undergo a full management review. Not because one bad manager had been found, but because one bad manager had been allowed to thrive. That was when the room changed. Relief did not come all at once. People who had lived under Graham too long did not know how to trust clean air immediately. A few looked near tears. Others looked terrified. Some, like Owen, looked ashamed. Mara looked at the floor. She did not feel victorious. She felt exposed. After the meeting, people avoided her and stared at her at the same time. Owen came close enough to apologize, then seemed to run out of language. Mara spared him by pretending to check her email. Evan found her near the copy room, where she was trying to convince the machine to stop blinking paper jam when there was, in fact, no visible paper and plenty of emotional hostility. He stood a respectful distance away. She did not look at him, so she said, "Do I call you Evan, mister? Pierce or your majesty of declined debit cards?" He almost smiled. "Evan is fine. Great. Evan." She shut the copier door harder than necessary. "Next time you want to understand poor people, maybe try asking before going undercover as a declined debit card." He absorbed that. I deserved that. You deserved worse, but I'm at work. A pause. He thanked her for the coffee. Mara finally turned. The anger in her face was not loud, but it was precise. That coffee was not a job interview. It was not a character reference. It was not permission to drag me into your investigation. I know. Do you? Her voice lowered. Because when men like Graham hurt people, women like me learn to stay invisible. And today, suddenly, everyone saw me. Not because I spoke, because you pointed a flashlight near where I was standing. Evan had no quick answer. That was the first thing Mara liked about him against her will. He did not fill the silence with leadership language. He let the truth make him uncomfortable. Finally, he reached into his wallet and took out a $5 bill. For yesterday, Mara stared at it, then at him. You're trying to reimburse the incident that caused my existential workplace crisis. I'm beginning to suspect that was poorly timed. Keep it, she said, taking her jammed printout from the copier at last. Consider it tuition. She walked away before he could respond. Evan looked down at the $5 bill in his hand. Then at the office beyond the glass, where people were already whispering, calculating, hoping, fearing. Yesterday, Mara had bought him coffee. Today, she had handed him the bill for everything he still did not understand. By the end of the week, Graham Ellis was no longer in the building, but somehow his shadow still had an access badge. Brightline did not become healthy because one man had been escorted out with a cardboard box and a face full of corporate betrayal. People still lowered their voices when managers walked by. Employees still apologized before asking questions. Calendar invitations still appeared after 6 p.m. with the cheerful violence of people who had forgotten workdays were supposed to end. Evan Pierce noticed all of it now. That was the problem with seeing clearly once. It made blindness harder to return to. He and Leah Morgan spent the next several days inside conference rooms with closed blinds, reading complaints that had been filed, buried, softened, or rerouted into useless language. Graham had been cruel, yes, but he had not invented the weather. Brightline had rewarded managers who produced fast results, even when those results came from fear. High turnover had been called team evolution. Burnout had been called growth pressure. Stolen work had been called leadership synthesis. Leah placed one report after another in front of Evan without mercy. He wanted to be angry at Graham. It was easier. Leah did not let him. She reminded him that toxic leaders rarely survived alone. Someone approved their numbers. Someone ignored their methods. Someone called the complaints ins nudge because the quarterly charts looked clean. Evan knew who that someone had been. Not directly, not intentionally. But his company had bought Brightline and studied its revenue before it studied its people. Meanwhile, Mara Collins became famous in the worst possible way. Not outside the company yet. Inside was bad enough. By Monday, someone had started calling her the coffee girl. Not loudly, never where HR could hear. But she heard it in the pause before conversations stopped. She saw it in the way coworkers who once asked her for help now hesitated, as if kindness had become politically dangerous. Some people thought she was lucky. Some thought she had orchestrated Graham's downfall with a $4 beverage and feminine witchcraft. Owen apologized 3 times, each one more awkward than the last, until Marfa finally told him that if he apologized again, she would assign him a feelings spreadsheet and make him color-code his shame. He stopped, mostly. Evan wanted to fix it. Of course he did. Fixing was his native language. He wanted to move Mara to a better team, give her a raise, assign a formal title, announce protections, escort every whispering employee into a values workshop until they became better citizens through exhaustion. Leah watched him outlining possibilities on a whiteboard and sighed. She is not a damaged department. Evan capped the marker. I know that. No, Leah said. You know it intellectually. Emotionally, you are 2 minutes from turning her into a special initiative. That irritated him because it was accurate. So instead of acting, Evan did something far more uncomfortable. He asked permission. Mara was out for the afternoon taking her mother to a follow-up appointment. Evan sent her a message asking whether he could stop by to apologize for the disruption Pierce Holdings had brought into her life. Mara did not answer for 43 minutes. Then she sent an address in one line. Do not bring flowers. My mother will assume you're guilty of murder. Tessa Collins lived in a small apartment full of books, pill organizers, and stubborn dignity. She was thinner than Evan expected, with a knitted blanket over her knees and the sharp eyes of a woman who had once been a librarian and still knew exactly when someone was overdue. Mara opened the door with suspicion. Evan stepped in holding nothing. Tessa approved of that immediately. "So you're the coffee man," she said. Evan paused. "That appears to be my title now. I've heard worse titles for CEOs." Mara made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. Evan apologized to Tessa for the stress caused by the investigation, the office gossip, and the company's failure to protect Mara sooner. He had prepared the apology carefully in his head. Tessa listened. Then she said a man who apologized in complete sentences was either genuinely sorry or raised by a very strict grandmother. Evan blinked. "My grandmother was terrifying. I knew it." Mara laughed then unexpectedly, and the sound did something inconvenient to Evan's chest. It was not the first time he had found Mara beautiful. But it was the first time he saw her in a room where she was not bracing for impact. She handed her mother tea, adjusted a pillow, rolled her eyes when Tess asked if the CEO had eaten lunch, and threatened to serve him crackers from the emotionally unavailable shelf. For 20 minutes, Evan forgot how to be impressive. He sat on a faded chair with one loose leg and drank tea that tasted vaguely medicinal, while Tessa asked him whether he knew the difference between helping a woman and annexing her life. He said he was learning. Tessa nodded as if that was barely acceptable. That evening, Evan made his next mistake. He sent Mara an email. The subject line read, "Proposal for dinner conversation." The body included 4 numbered items. Apology, continuation, clarification of non-work intentions, mutual food selection, optional dessert. Mara replied 8 minutes later. Rejected. Too many bullet points. Also, optional dessert is emotionally suspicious. Evan stared at the screen in his office for a full minute. Then, for reasons he could not fully defend, he smiled. The next morning, Mara found a folded piece of paper on her desk. No company letterhead, no assistant, no calendar invite, just handwriting. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" No agenda. "Dessert not optional if you want it." Mara read it twice. Owen peeked over the divider. She threw a paperclip at him without looking, but she smiled, not enough to say yes. Enough to make Evan, watching from the glass conference room like a man pretending not to watch, nearly walk into a chair. The real test came during the employee feedback session that afternoon. Leah had insisted it be voluntary. Anonymous submissions had been gathered, but several employees chose to speak in person. Some talked about Graham. Others talked about managers who remained. A designer described losing credit for months of work. A young father admitted he had hidden his child's doctor appointments because flexibility was treated like weakness. Then Mara stood. The room became too quiet. She held no notes. She said she appreciated the investigation, but she would not become the company's moral mascot. She was not proof that Brightline had a soul because she bought a stranger coffee. She was not the inspirational employee who suffered beautifully until a CEO noticed. She was tired, angry, skilled, and very much uninterested in being used to make everyone feel redeemed. Several people looked uncomfortable. "Good," her expression seemed to say. She went on. Brightline did not need a statue of kindness. It needed overtime rules that were followed, credit systems that named contributors, HR policies that protected caregivers before they broke down, managers evaluated by how many people grew under them, not how many survived them. Evan felt the instinct rise again. To answer, to explain, to assure, to repair the silence. Instead, he listened, really listened, not as a CEO waiting for his turn to speak, but as a man finally understanding that respect sometimes meant letting someone's anger remain unpolished. When Mara finished, Leah looked at Evan. He did not make a speech. He only thanked the room and said the changes would be drafted with employee input, not handed down as a performance of enlightenment. Afterward, Evan found Mara near the stairwell. She had the folded dinner note in one hand. "I'll join the reform team," she said. "Paid consulting hours, real authority over the practical stuff, scheduling, credit, caregiver policies. Complaint escalation. Done, and I'm not your redemption arc." Evan looked at her, then at the note in her hand. "Good," he said. "I was hoping to become a person, not a storyline." Mara tried not to smile, failed. "Dinner is not guaranteed," she said. "Understood. And if dessert becomes a bullet point again, I'm reporting you to Leah. That seems fair." She walked away. This time Evan did not follow. He had learned at least that much. The story leaked on a Wednesday morning. By 8:30, 3 people had sent Mara the same article. By 9:15, everyone at Brightline was pretending not to read it. The headline was exactly as humiliating as she feared. She paid for a stranger's coffee. Then he fired her boss the next morning. There was a blurry photo of Evan outside the cafe, taken from someone's social media post, and an even blurrier one of Mara walking into Brightline with wet hair and the expression of a woman who had not consented to becoming content before breakfast. The internet loved it. Of course it did. It had everything: a tired young woman, a secret CEO, a terrible boss, a $4 act of kindness, and enough class tension to make strangers feel morally refreshed while scrolling on their lunch breaks. By noon, the comments had begun naming her coffee girl. Mara hated that most of all. She was not a girl. She was 27, had a mother with rehab appointments, a landlord who believed grace periods were communist propaganda, and a consulting contract that still did not come with enough sleep. Pierce Holdings' PR department loved the story even more than the internet did. They called it organic brand redemption. Leah called it a lawsuit wearing lip gloss. By Thursday afternoon, Mara found herself accidentally copied on a campaign deck titled, "The Coffee That Changed a Company." The first slide had a warm brown color palette, a stock image of latte art, and the words. Mara stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then she laughed, not because it was funny, because if she did not laugh, she would walk into PR and begin throwing ethically sourced muffins. The storyboard was worse, a reenactment of the cafe scene: soft morning light, a hesitant CEO, a brave employee, a symbolic cup placed between them. Someone had even suggested filming Mara from behind, to preserve authenticity while maintaining emotional universality. Mara forwarded the deck to Evan with one line: "If you approve this, I will replace every office coffee pod with decaf." He replied 2 minutes later, "Please do not escalate to war crimes, I'm handling it." But handling it was slower than humiliation. The next morning, Mara spent 43 minutes on the phone with her mother's insurance provider, trying to understand why a post-acquisition benefits transition had disrupted one portion of Tess's rehab coverage. She listened to hold music that sounded like a dying aquarium while staring at an email asking whether she would be open to sharing her emotional journey in a controlled environment. A controlled environment. Her mother was relearning hand strength with rubber therapy balls, and Pierce Holdings was discussing whether Mara's coffee purchase needed a cinematic arc. By the time the internal town hall began that afternoon, Mara had decided she would sit quietly, take notes, and keep her blood pressure at a level her mother would approve of. That lasted 6 minutes. The lights dimmed. A giant screen behind the stage lit up with security footage from the cafe. There she was, hair damp, shoulders tense, card in hand, paying for Evan's coffee without knowing who he was. A few employees clapped. Someone actually said, "Ah." Mara felt the sound enter her like a slap. Evan, seated near the front with Leah, went completely still. The PR director stepped onto the stage with the bright, doomed energy of a person who had confused storytelling with consent. She began describing the clip as a reminder that Brightline's transformation had started with one simple human moment. Mara stood. Her chair scraped the floor loudly enough to stop the room. The PR director paused. Mara did not wait to be invited. She walked down the aisle, not toward the stage, but toward the screen. Her hands shook. Her voice did not. She said she had not given permission for that video to be shown. She said nobody had asked whether she wanted her tired face, her private morning, or her $4 choice projected like a corporate fable. The room fell silent. She turned toward the employees. Everyone was applauding a cup of coffee, because it was easier than talking about why she had been too afraid to complain about Graham for months. Easier than talking about why employees with sick parents stayed quiet because insurance was a leash. Easier than talking about why a company needed a viral story before it remembered workers were human. Her voice cracked only once, when she mentioned Tess's rehab coverage, not because she wanted pity, because she was furious that her mother's care had become a line item while her own kindness had become a mood board. Evan stood. The PR director turned toward him as if expecting rescue. She did not get it. He walked to the control table himself and stopped the video. The screen went black. Then he faced the room. His apology was not polished. That made it better. He said the company had taken Mara's moment without consent and used it to make itself feel better. He said that was not transformation. It was extraction with warmer lighting. He apologized to Mara in front of everyone, not for making her uncomfortable, but for allowing the company to repeat the same old habit in a more attractive form, taking from people with less power and calling it inspiration. Then he canceled the campaign. No teaser video, no interview, no coffee slogan, no brand redemption arc. The PR team looked physically wounded. Leah looked like she might finally sleep 8 minutes tonight. Mara sat down slowly, unsure whether she wanted to cry, laugh, or invoice someone for emotional damages. The cancellation cost Evan more than embarrassment. Within hours, the board called an emergency meeting. A major investor argued that public sympathy was valuable and reform was expensive. The new caregiver benefits review, management training, complaint system, and insurance corrections would add costs with no guaranteed return. Evan listened from the head of the table. Mara was there as part of the reform team, seated beside Leah, not as a symbol but as a paid consultant with a folder full of practical recommendations and very little patience left. The investor called the proposed changes emotionally reactive. Evan almost smiled at the phrase. Graham would have loved it. Then he answered. He said if doing the right thing only survived when it was cheap, it was never a value, it was decoration. He said Pierce Holdings had bought Brightline's revenue but had inherited its people, and people were not operational clutter. He said the cost of a humane workplace was not a threat to the business. It was the price of no longer lying about what kind of company they wanted to be. The room did not cheer. Boardrooms rarely did, but something shifted. Mara watched him carefully. This time he was not defending her. Not the coffee, not the viral story. He was defending a principle, even when it made the math uglier. That mattered. Later they ended up in the stairwell because the elevators were full, and Mara claimed she needed oxygen not filtered through investor panic. Evan followed at a respectful distance. For several flights neither of them spoke. The concrete stairwell smelled faintly of dust and emergency paint. It was the least romantic place in Chicago, which somehow made it safer. Mara stopped on the landing. You're less terrible than I expected, she said. Evan placed a hand over his heart. That may be the most romantic performance review I've ever received. She tried not to smile, failed. There was no kiss, no dramatic confession. Only a tired woman leaning against a railing and a CEO learning that love, like leadership, began when he stopped trying to own the story. For once, the silence between them did not feel awkward. It felt like trust taking its time. A few months later, Brightline Media was not perfect, but it was no longer pretending the old problems had been misunderstandings. Managers were evaluated by team feedback, not just campaign numbers. Credit on projects had to be documented. Caregiver benefits were reviewed after the merger, and Tessa's rehab coverage was restored, not as a favor to Mara, but as part of a company-wide correction. Mara did not return to her old role. She finished her contract on the reform team, then enrolled in a communications leadership program she had delayed for years. She still consulted for Brightline part-time, but now she entered meetings as someone whose voice belonged there, not as someone waiting to be interrupted. Tessa recovered slowly, with the stubbornness of a woman who refused to let a stroke ruin her library card signature. She also developed a dangerous fondness for teasing Evan. Whenever he visited, she asked if he had learned to order coffee like a normal citizen yet. Evan always said he was making progress. Mara always said the evidence was limited. He was still under pressure. The board still questioned costs. Some executives still believed kindness looked better in speeches than in budgets. But Evan had changed in one important way. He stopped disguising himself to hear the truth. He asked employees questions directly. Then he waited long enough for honest answers. He listened without turning every feeling into a dashboard, though Leah still caught him trying twice and confiscated his marker. One rainy morning, Mara walked into the same cafe where everything had started. Evan was already at the counter. This time his card worked. His ordering, however, remained a public concern. He asked for a seasonal drink and pronounced it so badly the barista stared at him, as if he had personally injured Autumn. Mara laughed behind him. Evan turned, and the smile that crossed his face was not CEO polished. It was relieved, human. You got the size right, she said. I've grown. You said pumpkin like it had betrayed you. It was an unfamiliar vowel situation. He paid for 2 coffees. When Mara picked hers up, she saw the receipt tucked beneath the cup. On it Evan had written, paid forward, not paid back. She looked at him. He did not rush to explain, which proved he really had learned something. Then he said he was not trying to repay the $4. He was not trying to balance the universe, settle a debt, or turn her into the woman who had changed his company with caffeine. He wanted coffee with her, because he wanted to know Mara Collins beyond the story everyone else kept trying to tell. Mara held the cup in both hands. Note, she said. No PR, no agenda, no emotional town hall disguised as a date. I left the bullet points at home. She studied him for a moment, then smiled. Okay, coffee. They sat by the window while rain softened Chicago into silver and gray. This time, Mara was not calculating how much money remained in her account. Evan was not pretending to be anyone else. The coffee between them was not proof, payment, or apology. It was simply warm. And maybe love had not begun when Evan fired her boss. Maybe it began later, when he stopped using her kindness as a mirror for his own goodness, and started seeing her as a woman with the right to choose her own story. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments, would you forgive Evan after learning the truth? And have you ever done one small act of kindness that changed more than you expected? Please like and subscribe Soul Stirring Stories channel. Real love is not repayment. Sometimes it is simply someone sitting across from you, no agenda, no performance, finally ready to see you as yourself.